glory. You shine a little bit like gold or like diamonds. And so as we look at narcissistic development, we will see that it's a very normal thing for a person to need to develop a capacity to accept being seen, to accept being celebrated, to accept their own drive toward exhibitionism. And when we get into difficulties in our development on what is known as the narcissistic line of development, we get to where we have problems about this. We might say we have Satan's problem about this. And so what I'd like to start with tonight is talking to you a little bit about some of the current understanding of narcissistic development, what we mean by that in psychoanalysis today, and how that differs from what it used to be thought about, and then talk a little bit about the current understanding of what is needed to heal difficulties with narcissistic development, so that we can get some sense about the geography that we're operating in here in the psyche. So let me start a little bit about what we know today about narcissistic development. You know, in the history of the church, the idea that you might be narcissistic was considered sort of like egocentrism, and was to be a bad thing. That is to say, this is where we got our idea that being selfless was good. And the idea that you really should be humble, by which you would mean you would not want to put yourself forward. You would not want to toot your own horn, so to speak. You would not want to show yourself as being too enthusiastic about yourself. That would not be humble, you see. In current theory, however, and the feminists have picked up on this quite a lot, in current theory, narcissism is not seen to be a negative thing in itself at all. That is to say, they have developed an idea that there is such a thing as healthy narcissism. In other words, we need to make a distinction between healthy narcissism and pathological narcissism. Now, healthy narcissism is something that takes a lot of work to develop in the psyche. The school of thought that I want to recommend to you to look at is the school of Heinz Kohut. I've mentioned it to you before. H-E-I-N-Z, Kohut. And the name of this school of thought is self-psychology. In Kohut's work, it is emphasized that the child comes into the world with a grandiosity which is normal and natural. And this grandiosity is a healthy grandiosity for the infant. And what it needs is to be seen by the parents. It needs to be welcomed by the parents. We Jungians would talk about this somewhere in the neighborhood of the archetype of the divine child. That is to say, that when the child comes into the world, what it needs is to be seen and admired and adored, and the technical word is mirrored. That the child needs to be mirrored. It needs to be seen, and all eyes need to be on it. There needs to be no rejection of its little claim to being a wonderful little God. And the task of the adults in its environment are to provide that adoration. You can think it's almost like a creche scene. You know, everybody gathers around. What you're supposed to do is you bring the sheep in, the goats, and the camels, and everybody adores the child. And this is normal. See, this is supposed to happen according to Kohut. And as the child develops, it is very important for the parents to provide this kind of excited, enthusiastic, blessing eye, so that when the child is feeling wonderful, the child will be met by an attuned response which will say, yeah, you are pretty wonderful, aren't you? It's like one little boy that was a neighbor of mine one time. He was in visiting. He and his dad were in visiting with me. And he came in and he said, Dad, he interrupted his dad. He said, Dad, I really feel good today. He said, yeah, he said. I feel so good that I think that I can have a BM so big that it will go down the Mississippi River and it will knock down all the bridges all the way to the ocean. And my friend said, wow. Which was what the Cohoutians would say, that was a very attuned response. See? Instead of saying, get out of here. You know, he said, wow, you must really feel great today. Yeah, Dad. See? Now, what happens is that optimally, that's supposed to happen optimally. The parent is supposed to be attuned and in touch and notice this and give the gleam in the eye to that divine child and that little child. And according to the Cohoutian theory, if the parents do that, then the child will be able to accept this wonderfulness, and when he falls down or stubs his toe or something doesn't work quite right and he is upset, the parent, because the parent is attuned, will pick them up, restore the sense of self, and gradually the child will integrate that wonderfulness, that godlike wonderfulness, into a sense of self-esteem, a nice, normal sense of self-esteem. That if the parent works with the child as they come down from this great throne of godness, and the parent doesn't let the child be unduly traumatized in the encounter with life, that gradually that God claim will gradually be, here's the technical word, transmuted and internalized. And what that simply means is that gradually that child will increase in self-esteem, increasingly have a sense of self in the face of the challenges of life experiences. And whenever disappointments come, the sense of self will be so strong that the child and later adult will not get depressed too easily, not become enraged too easily, but will be able to handle the difficulties of life without losing a sense of self. And it's a gradual process. They talk about, here's another technical word, and you parents, you've done this millions of times, but they talk about microstructuralization. And by that means that every time he stubs his toe, you comfort, and every time they says, look how wonderful I am, they're seen, and you hope that they're seen well enough, and that there's enough parental enthusiasm and enough parental celebration, I call it parental blessing, so that child gradually comes down off of the God claim into the human realm with a healthy sense of self-esteem. Now, that's the way it's supposed to happen. See? But the problem is that a lot of the time, the person or persons who are supposed to be there paying attention are what? Distracted, busy, tired, discouraged, preoccupied, drunk, whatever. Now, Kohut says, a child doesn't have to have this perfect mirroring, this good mirroring, if there's somebody in the environment that the child can idealize with and snuggle up to, that the child can see as wonderful. So in other words, if you can either see the child as wonderful or you can be adequate enough for the child to see you as wonderful, and let the child come up and be close to you and share in your wonderfulness. So Kohut says the child can get enough sense of being good either by being mirrored adequately